Hi everyone. So a fairly brief introduction from me today, and you're in for a treat in this lesson because it's the one of the most fantastical periods of rebellion that we study in our entire course. The uprising of 1803, led by this handsome chap, Robert Emmet. So Robert Emmet and his brother Thomas Emmet had been inspired and involved in the rebellion of 1798. They were followers of Theobald Wolfe Tone. And after Tone's capture and then suicide in 1798, the brothers had fled to France to seek safety, of course, where they found a government friendly to them, still intent on causing disruption in Ireland because that was the best way to get back at Britain. And they agitated for another rebellion. So Robert returned to Dublin and carried out the organisation on the ground. He moved back into his father's house. Thomas stayed in France and tried and failed to get a private audience with Napoleon Bonaparte himself to secure another invasion force that would help them in their rebellion, because they both realised that actually foreign help was crucial to having any chance of overcoming the British. The French help was not forthcoming. Thomas couldn't even get to meet Napoleon Bonaparte, unsurprisingly, really, let alone negotiate any form of help from the French. So they were on their own. But nevertheless, Robert decided that he would go ahead with his uprising. And it's one of those kind of farcical tales of just hopeless optimism in the face of all sorts of shortcomings. The organisation was terrible, the communication was terrible, Emmet's leadership was terrible, and all sorts of unfortunate events unfolded before the day of the rebellion in 1803. Nevertheless, Robert Emmet decided he was going ahead anyway, and the whole thing failed miserably. So, tragic failure. If you look at the story through those lenses, that's what you see. However, during his trial, Robert Emmet spoke very eloquently. He's a young man as well, so it's another one of those kind of poignant trials of these young, kind of bold, passionate men who desperately want to achieve an independent Ireland. And he spoke so passionately and so eloquently about the nationhood of his beloved Ireland that people after the event began to see him much in the same vein as Wolfe Tone himself, a romantic martyr, a young, passionate man that was prepared to die for the independence of Ireland. And so, yes, his rebellion on the day failed, but again, he kind of perhaps sits in Irish history as one of the early nationalists that inspires those who come after him. So see what you think. There's two different ways of seeing Robert Emmet. So, as I say, the whole kind of uprising is a kind of comedy of errors, really. Things go desperately wrong. The authorities know that something is going on, but they don't know who's leading it for once. Normally, the British know everything. But actually, one of the great things about Robert Emmet's uprising of 1803 is they didn't really know who was in charge. They didn't know who the key leaders were and who was organising it. There was just a sense of disquiet. And Emmet and his followers had come up with some quite ingenious ideas. This is the bit of the story that I absolutely love. They were going to use pikes, so the long pointy sticks. These are the weapons of the peasantry. You don't need to be trained in arms to kind of, jab somebody with a big pointy stick. The problem with those, of course, is they're very, very obvious. If you go walking around the streets with a huge long pointy stick, the authorities are going to notice you and they're going to get suspicious. So one of the things that Emmet's followers come up with is a folding pike. Ingenious. So fold it in half, you can conceal it under your long coat and walk around the streets of Dublin without anybody really knowing what you're up to. The other kind of great invention that I rather like that they came up with was the use of explosives. So they came up with the idea of wooden blocks which they would nail to the cobbled streets of Dublin, and inside the blocks would be explosive charges, gunpowder. And the idea was that they would have a fuse attached, at some distance, and you'd be able to light the fuses, and they'd cause explosions. And they were going to use these explosions to seal off some parts of Dublin, and also to kind of direct almost the activities of the authorities when they were challenged. So it was quite ingenious, really. unfortunately, it didn't come off because a few weeks before the rebellion was due to happen, in the house where they were making these explosive devices, there was an accidental explosion, which of course drew the authorities straight there. So they definitely knew that somebody was up to something. Why on earth was this house full of, these homemade bombs, effectively? It was a clear indication of terrorist activity, but they still didn't really know who was in charge of it and who was responsible for it. There's also a great story about them going to Emmet's father's house to question him, and he had constructed an elaborate system of pulleys and trapdoors and kind of false doors, and he managed to get away through this kind of bizarre system that he'd rigged up. So he was clearly a very inventive and imaginative chap. And I think for that reason, I rather like him, and I rather like his story. It's a really good piece of kind of Irish storytelling. But his uprising fails. He fails to get messages out to the reinforcements. He fails to kind of really set a start time for it all in Dublin. So he's expecting 2,000 men to kind of appear and support him, and 80 turn up, 80. So, a tiny proportion of what was expected. He's clearly not going to take over the city of Dublin with 80 men. They're going to try and attack Dublin Castle. Well, come on, think back to Year 7 history. Attacking a castle is never particularly easy, even when you've got siege weapons and a huge army to stake outside. So with 80 men, that's not going to be great. They had come up with the idea of making lots and lots of scaling ladders. So the big ladders that you put up against the wall and you climb up and you try and get over and inside the castle compound. The only problem was they'd forgot to make the rungs, which is quite an important part of a ladder. So they had lots of ladder sides, but nothing in the middle, which meant that obviously those ladders couldn't be used to climb up anything. So another kind of abject failure. So just the overall organisation of this was dire. And as I say, it's a really, really good story. So what we're learning today, Robert Emmet, you're going to make that decision after you've read the story and answered some questions. Was he just a tragic failure, or was he actually quite an inspirational figure? So you're going to hopefully be able to describe his rebellion, explain why it failed, so I've alluded to some of the reasons already, and assess his impact on nationalism. And it's one of those interesting ones where you think perhaps, in the short term, he doesn't have much impact. The rebellion fails. He's arrested. He's put on trial. He's executed. Great story even about his execution, that he manages to negotiate with the hangman that they won't drop him until he gives the signal. So they put the noose around his neck. He's standing on the stool and he says, "When I drop my handkerchief, that's when I'm ready to go." And he doesn't drop the handkerchief, and the hangman keeps asking him, can we go? Can we go? And Robert Emmet keeps saying, "Not yet. Not yet, not yet." And in the end, the hangman, with complete exasperation, just kicks the stool away, and he's left dangling for half an hour before he's cut down dead. And there's some kind of sense that maybe he was hoping, even until that last minute, he was kind of vainly hoping for a rescue team to arrive and kind of, get him a reprieve. But it didn't happen, unfortunately. Poor old Emmet. But you've got to love his optimism, I think. It's a great lesson for us all there. So this is what you're going to do today. I'm going to shut up now. So I told you, nice short one. There's a marvellous statue of him. There's great descriptions as well of his attire. So he wears a green velvet coat, a frock coat, you can see it there on the statue, and he wears big golden epaulets, which are the things that go on, that military men wear them on their shoulders. They're often made of kind of braiding or rope. So you can imagine him with his kind of golden shoulders and his bright green, of course, for the green for Irish nationalism, his green velvet jacket striding around the streets of Dublin. So I bet he cut quite a figure. So read the extract and answer the questions, and then you're going to make a decision. Was he a tragic failure, or was he a romantic martyr? Okay, so hope you enjoy it. There's documents on the Schoology page for you to read, and there's also a set of questions for you to answer. And if you answer the questions in full sentences, that will give you a brilliant set of notes all about Robert Emmet. Okay, enjoy. Cheerio for now.